just to say a question for now, which relates to that actually. You went through quite quickly the end of the last year, which I'm particularly interested in regarding Sheidim and the opposite of Sheidim, and good Sheidim, bad Sheidim, and the Maggid that spoke to Rabbi Yosef Cairo. I think you were going, maybe you can just say a bit more, you were going, or you were saying that that's not actually necessarily a physical phenomenon like bacteria, one gave as an example, a modern day way maybe of describing it, but it could be a psychological one that the individual concerned, I think, didn't quite. Is that what you were saying? Presumably that's a very unusual interpretation to say that it actually wasn't a Maggid, but it actually was, in this case, Rabbi Yosef Cairo himself, sort of a way of doing whatever he was doing in his writings or whatever, was to have another. It's almost like pretending there's another individual there. I mean, that's why I'm just trying to understand what exactly you meant by that.
Okay, so thank you for giving me a chance actually to address this, because I did rush through a little bit in the last year because I wanted to move on from the topic of Sheidim due to the delays I had in being away and so on. We had ended up spending far longer than I'd wanted on the topic of Sheidim, but this is an important idea, so maybe let me clarify it. The core concept I was trying to say, and actually this ties in a little bit to Peter's question also, is that vocabulary can differ between eras and generations, and one can conceptualize features using different ways of thinking about them. And I'll give you an example of this, and this is a sensitive example. I said last week actually that the examples I was going to give were sensitive, and in the rush I didn't actually finish off saying the more sensitive application of this. But for example, when we talk about a ruach ra, an evil spirit that possesses someone, and one reads the descriptions of the ruach ra, it sounds very much like mental illness in certain cases. When one even when one's talking about figures in Nach, and one struggles with, for example, hearing about the story of Shaul HaMelech and some of the things that he did, it reads very much as if he was perhaps suffering from waves of depression and the like, and one can't help but think of these ideas as one reads these stories. Now, if we consider human health and functionality to be a good thing, and inability to function healthily, whether physically or mentally, as a challenge, and a challenge in human functionality, and we think particularly in the realm of thought, that clarity of thought is a route to godliness and connection with Hashem, then we can understand why a confusion of thought, such as that which Shaul experienced, may be referred to as a ruach ra, as a badness of spirit that was afflicting him. Now we have to be careful over here, because badness or ra or evil can imply a moral judgment. Now it's clear that in the context of ruach ra, there's no moral judgment meant, because this isn't a choice that he faced, this was an experience that he went through. Nonetheless, we can talk about this as a difficult experience, as a bad experience that someone went through. So even in English, we use vocabulary in this double terminology, speaking about it as a bad experience or a negative experience without implying a moral element to this. So this is perhaps an aspect of how language can be used. Let me give another example of this in the context of Sheidim, which is a clearer example. The Gemara says that an empty house, a ruined house, can be possessed by ruchos rois, which could be understood to be Sheidim in the context of the sugya. Now, when one enters a ruin, or Gemara speaks about in the context of a cemetery that one goes to at night, one goes to alone, Yechidi, one goes to alone, there's no doubt that this leads to, or can lead to, a panic and fear and confusion and a seeing of evil everywhere, and every shadow haunts one and every movement panics one. And this could be referred to as a ruach ra, as a confusion and a blurring of the clarity of thought, which would normally be that which we want in maximum human functioning. We want humans at their best to have. So, I tried to also explain this last week in the context of bereavement. I wasn't trying to say that this is all that tumah is, but certainly an aspect of tumah which is associated, for example, with Thomas Mace, with contact with a dead body, could be this very topic itself, could be this idea. We saw the Orach Chaim, who says that all tumah is associated with a loss of life, ultimately. The most extreme form of tumah is Thomas Mace, where a human being dies, and where you have the greatest loss of life, but the death of an animal is a smaller example of that. Even childbirth, post-childbirth, there's a tumah associated with it. The tumas leda. These aren't bad experiences. There's nothing wrong with childbirth. On the contrary, it's a wonderful experience. It's a simcha. Even a bereavement, which obviously is a terrible experience to go through, is not a bad experience in the moral sense of the word. It's part of life. Part of the reality of our condition as human beings is that all of us go through bereavement and loss. Nonetheless, loss is associated for a time with a confusion and with an inability to make sense of the situation, till eventually over time one recovers from the loss and achieves clarity of thought. And one understanding of the concept of tumah associated, or one aspect of the concept of tumah associated with loss, is that it reflects this confusion, such that one isn't in a condition of being able to approach kedusha. Again, being Tommy is not Asa. There's no Issa to be Tommy. Nonetheless, if one is in a situation of tumah, one isn't allowed to approach kedusha. One isn't allowed to ascend to the Har HaBayis. One isn't allowed to eat a korban, and so on and so forth. So tumah is associated with a lack of the foundational level that is necessary to achieve kedusha. One can be tahor one's whole life and never achieve kedusha because one never dedicates oneself to sanctity. However, if one chooses to dedicate oneself to sanctity, kedusha is accessible. Nonetheless, it may be more difficult to achieve at a time of bereavement and loss or tumah. So we see the language of tumah associated with a blurring of vision. Literally, when one suffers a loss, one's vision becomes blurred. Demois, tears in Hebrew, means confusion. Dema is a confusion and a blurring, a lack of vision. One thought that one was going to walk hand in hand through life with someone, and at the time of experiencing a loss, one suddenly doesn't see where things are going. I thought I knew where life was going, and now it's taken me on a different path, a different route. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm heading. Bereavement is always associated with a clarity of with a life with a loss of clarity of path and confusion. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to make sense of this. And then the process of recovery is that of nechama. Nechama means like we have at the beginning of Parshas B'Shalach. Nechama means a refinding, not consolation just, but a refinding of direction. I see what my path through life will be. I didn't want to suffer the bereavement. It's a terrible loss. I didn't choose to be in this situation. But now that I find myself in this situation, I see there's also a path. It's not the path I wanted. It's not the path I chose. But there's still a path through life. There will still be good things that will happen. There'll still be simchas. There'll still be friendship. There'll still be positive experiences. There's still a path in life. It's not the one I chose, but I'm still on a path. Incidentally, when we get good news, our vision also blurs. Now, if you get told you've won the lottery, there's also a moment of overwhelming emotion which causes tears. Because again, I feel a momentary loss of path. I thought my life was going to be going in every day to the factory to work on the conveyor line, the assembly line. I've now won the lottery, so what does this mean? How's this going to change my life? Where am I going to be heading? The difference is that with a positive emotion, we more quickly recover, and more quickly the tears stop, and I get back a clarity of vision, and say, okay, I'm going to be able to give up my job in the factory, and I'll be able to buy my castle in Scotland, and enjoy my newfound millions. So when it's a positive, overwhelming emotion, we also experience tears, because there's a loss of path. We just recover more quickly from the process. We just recover more quickly from the loss. So this is one way of relating to the concept of tumah. It's a clarity of vision. And particularly in the Rambam's thinking, clarity of vision is very important. Our ability to relate and connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is partly connected with our ability to think and reason. Reason is a great gift. It's the ability to navigate life and to achieve awareness of spirituality, and the loss of that is an evil of sorts. Not an evil in the moral sense that I'm responsible for it, but an evil in the sense of an inability to function and to cope. So this is the concept of Tumah, the concept of Nechama, as was just posted in your question. It's an appeal for help to achieve clarity. Consolation is the rediscovery of a path through life. And that process occurs as one goes through a shiva, and then shloshim, and then the year, and one recovers a direction, a sense of purpose and direction, whereas at the beginning of a movement one feels a complete confusion of direction. Now, there are certain rituals associated with emerging from Tumah. Some of these rituals are better known, for example, the mikveh. Others are the Hora Aduma, which we don't understand at all. But the way these work would appear to also have amongst other things, to also have a psychological element to them. So Rashi, for example, on the Hora Aduma, despite our lack of clarity, gives considerable, as to what it means, it's a chok, it's the example of a chok, gives considerable explanation as to what one's meant to reflect upon in each of the symbolic aspects of the Hora Aduma. Or the mikveh. The mikveh is an immersion in water. Mefarshim describe it as a return to the womb, as a rebirth. One's in the water and one is unable to sustain life. Water, immersion in water is a place where life can't exist, and then one emerges from the water and achieves a sort of rebirth of sorts. So these are processes which, beyond the sort of existential and intrinsic value to them, also appear to have a message of recovery in them. I mentioned last time that the single biggest mystery that confronts us human beings is that of mortality, of human mortality. How can it be that a human being that has consciousness, that has awareness of absolute value and meaning and purpose, and is capable of touching the absolute, capable of touching infinity, can cease to exist? What does that mean? And what does it tell us about our life? The biggest mystery of existence is confronting our own mortality and the mortality of others, and realizing that we're not here forever, something that is very difficult to grasp. And probably the deepest source of existential crisis, existential angst, and philosophical existentialism and doubt about what it means to be a human being derives from our need to confront mortality and death. And it's fascinating that the chok, the mitzvah, which is most mysterious of all, which is considered the prime example of a chok, is around the same topic, is around recovery from death and restoration of tahara after the confusion of loss. I mentioned last time also that the word tzchuma and tahara probably mean clarity and lack of clarity. When we talk about tahara as pure, we mean pure in the sense of clear, like a pure liquid as opposed to one which has a mixture in it. And this would appear to be the moment of, this would appear to be the concept of ruach ra in this formulation. Now, in answer to Charles' question, I now want to apply this also to Revelation and the Maggid of the Beis Yosef and the like, and talk about what that means on a psychological level. So, if we understand that the tool through which we receive clarity and awareness of spirituality, one of the primary tools, perhaps the primary tool according to the thinking of the Rambam and the like, is our minds. Our minds, therefore, are spiritual vehicles. Our minds are capable of touching spirituality, of touching infinity, and achieving clarity of purpose and insight into the absolute. So when we use our minds to explore the world and to understand it, there are very serious philosophical questions about to what degree we are genuinely innovating or to what degree we are simply exploring. Many mathematicians, for example, describe the experience of discovery of insights into maths, in which they see themselves more as scientists than as inventors. In other words, they're not innovating a mathematical insight, but they're simply exploring the worlds of numbers and cruising through the landscape of concepts and thoughts and encountering ideas. So as we think about life and we achieve insight, is this an internal experience or is this an external experience? Is it that we are generating something from within ourselves, Or are we simply using our minds to hear that which is being said from outside ourselves? In other words, we live as human beings in a world of reality. As we achieve insight into matters of philosophy, matters of science, and certainly into matters of godliness and kedusha, is it that we are creating something from within our own internal mindset, our own inner psychological and conscious existence? Or are we allowing ourselves, through the process of thinking, to receive and to hear and to experience that which is outside ourselves and uncover a reality which is beyond ourselves? Now, one analogy as to how to think of this is that of radio waves, which are constantly permeating the ether. They're constantly there. Every moment, as we're all sitting here, there's enormous electromagnetic radiation, the radio waves traveling across our planet, and one needs to tune in order to be able to hear them. Chazal use a similar analogy when they speak about a pascoe. Every day, a pascoe, a heavenly voice is coming out from Sinai, saying certain things, and the question is, do we hear what that voice says or not? So there is a constant broadcast spirituality. There's a world in which we live, in which we bothered, if we made the effort to hear the spiritual insight that's been given, if we would tune into it, we would be able to hear it. Now, when someone tunes in to that spiritual insight, are they experiencing an internal intellectual experience or an external near prophetic experience? It's not clear that those two options mean radically different things. It's possible that there's an overlap, more of an overlap than we acknowledge between the two, because a spiritual thinker, in our example, Rabbi Yosef Kari, the Beis Yosef, is hearing something of the reality, in his case the spiritual reality, of which the world is speaking. So he's hearing and achieving spiritual insight, and our modern sort of division in which we ask ourselves, is what he's hearing, is what he's experiencing an external experience in which a malach, an angel, is coming to speak to him, or is it an internally generated intellectual experience, may not have been a divide that the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Kari, believed in. He may well have experienced the spiritual and intellectual insights that he arrived at as that of hearing reality, of hearing the spirituality that the world is broadcasting. Let's remind ourselves again, part of what we mean by the phrase a malach. A malach is a messenger, literally a messenger of Hashem. The pasuk says, Oser malach of ruchos. The winds, the force of gravity, the sun are all malachim of Hashem. They are all agents of Hashem through which that which Hashem wants to happen in the world is achieved. We focus, when we speak about angels, on spiritual forces, spiritual angels, but everything is a messenger of Hashem. So a magid is a particular type of malach, a particular type of angel, whose role is to be magid, to teach Torah. This is a common experience described by Jewish mystics who experience a magid, a revelation from a magid, whether it was Rabbi Yosef Karo, whether it was the Ari, and various other mystics over time. In other words, they hear a messenger of Hashem, they hear an angelic voice, they experience a force in the reality, the fabric of reality, which teaches them insight. Now, this shouldn't be a surprising idea. Of course we're meant to experience reality as teaching us spiritual insights. We say this, lift up your eyes on high, see who created all of this. From my flesh I should see God. So of course we should see the world as amongst the agency, the malachim, the messengers of Hashem that are interacting with us as human beings. Of course we should experience part of the broadcast message of creation, part of the message sent out by Hashem as being spiritual insight. And in the same way as we can choose to look at the winds and see it in purely secular terms, or we can choose to look at the forces of nature and see these as messengers from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Similarly, we can look at the concepts, the laws of science, as more abstract malachim of sorts. If we ask ourselves, is there a way we can, on a relatable level, can we understand what we mean by spiritual messengers? You may say, okay, I hear what you mean by physical messengers. I hear that the wind and the sun are malachim of Hashem. But what do you mean by spiritual messengers? I mean lots of things, and it's difficult to understand. But part of what we can mean by a non-physical messenger is a law of science. Again, in science, there's a lot of discussion about what we mean by a law of science. Do we mean there's some abstract conceptual reality there? Or do we mean simply it's a summary of how the world operates? Certainly, if we go with a model of an abstract reality, there is a generative force to a law of science, or maybe even to a mathematical concept like numbers, as Plato thought, then we begin understanding what we mean by conceptual or non-physical messengers or agents of Hashem in the world. And similarly, that some of these agents may be performing direct, overt spiritual functions, such as broadcasting to us human beings spiritual insight. Indeed, all of us should go through life attempting to hear those malachim, attempting to hear those voices of spiritual insight. So when Rabbi Yosef Karo learns Torah from a Maggid, it is conceivable that the distinction that we in the 21st century immediately want to ask, which is, does this mean he was hearing an external voice or an internal voice, may be a flawed way of thinking about these things. It may well be that this is as much an external voice as an internal voice. This is Rabbi Yosef Karo attuning himself through his incredible spiritual sensitivity to hear these spiritual messages that life is broadcasting, that the universe, that the world is broadcasting, which are ultimately messengers of spiritual insight from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And on a lesser level, all of us ought to be able to hear these spiritual insights in a similar way. I mentioned last week that no less a figure than Chazon Ish comment was asked, why is it that we don't pasken like these insights of Yosef Karo? Indeed, he heard them from a malach. We can also ask the opposite question. If he heard them from a malach, how can they have any Torah legitimacy? Surely lo b'shmaimi, Torah is not meant to be heard from a malach. Torah is meant to be heard from human beings. And the Chazon Ish's answer to the first question, and presumably this would be an answer to the second question too, is that Rabbi Yosef Karo and his malach are not two separate beings. They are one and the same. Rabbi Yosef Karo was accessing Torah and spirituality through his work and through his path to spirituality. And in the same way as Shivim Ponim the Torah, there's many ways of hearing the Torah, and each way has a legitimacy to it. Nonetheless, in the halachic system, we have to pasken like one as opposed to the other, based upon the rules of halacha and what is considered through the halachic system to be the primary way of hearing Torah. Similarly, of course, Rabbi Yosef Karo heard from the malach, from the messenger, spiritual insight, but these are his chelek in Torah, and therefore not always will the case be that we will pasken like how he has heard this spiritual insight. I've been speaking a lot, but I see that Naomi and Andrew, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Rabbi Zobin, you said that Shaul, there's no moral judgment with Shaul.
Yes.
The most heartbreaking posuk that I think in the whole of Tanakh is the posuk which says that he transferred the Ruach Kodesh from Shaul to David, and David was left with Ruach Ra. So my question is, you said Ruach Ra was really lack of clarity, and Menucha is your ability to kind of calibrate and get back to clarity. And it seems for Shaul that there was no way back for him. The Ruach Ra was literally put on him. Does that mean that there's still no moral judgment? He's not in control and he has no way back? So what does that mean for somebody who has Ruach Ra that takes hold of them? There's no moral judgments. It's not like, where does that work? How does that work?
So thank you for that. So I don't mean to say that there is no possibility of moral judgment. Shaul, like every other human being, faces choices in his life, and sometimes he makes correct choices and sometimes he made incorrect choices and was held culpable for them. Indeed, he lost his kingship through decisions that he made, and there were other decisions, presumably in his life, that he made for which he was responsible. I don't mean to say that a person who suffers from mental illness is absolved of all moral responsibility. Certainly not. There may well be moral decisions which are within their responsibility, and that judgment as to what is within or out of our responsibility is clearly only one that God, that Hashem himself, can make. All I meant to say was that in and of in itself, the experience of a Ruach Ra doesn't necessarily imply a moral a moral failure or a moral judgment. It is a condition within which people can find themselves, much like the emotional turmoil of being in a haunted house, in a gloomy house, much like the emotional turmoil of bereavement, and much like the emotional turmoil of childbirth, or indeed of winning the lottery and good news. These are simply part of human experiences that present their own opportunities and own challenges. Within those human experiences, we all face moral responsibility as to how we deal with them, and everyone's degree of moral responsibility will differ depending on the circumstances in a way that presumably only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can judge. So I'm not saying that Shaul faces no moral responsibility. I'm simply saying that the condition in and of in itself of a Ruach Ra doesn't imply a moral judgment. Indeed, when we look at the realm of mental health, there could be situations of mental health in which someone is absolved of any moral decision-making ability. We would say this is someone who is incapable of any reasoning whatsoever, a very, very serious situation of a psychotic breakdown or the like. And there could be other situations in which someone is in a very difficult position in terms of their health, mental or physical, but still has moral choices to be able to make. There could be situations where someone is responsible for their mental health, someone who has made decisions about drug abuse or the like, and that has triggered challenges, and maybe there's to be situations where they're responsible for the situation. So I'm not saying there's a clear-cut absolving of any moral responsibility. I'm just saying in and of in itself, describing something as a Ruach Ra doesn't imply moral judgment. I want to emphasize again what the point I was trying to make over here, which is one can use the vocabulary of external language or the vocabulary of internal language, both in the sense of semi-prophetic experiences like the Maggid of Rabbi Yosef Karo, or like terrible experiences like that of a Ruach Ra in the most extreme form as per Shaul, or in the lesser form as per the Gemara's description of someone who enters into a house, a base, a cemetery at night, or a desolate and ruined house, where there creates a certain degree of confusion and turmoil and lack of clarity and fear, which isn't rational, and that irrationality can be referred to as a Ruach Ra of sorts. So there's a parallel. It simply is a question of which vocabulary one adopts. Does one adopt the vocabulary of focusing on the external aspect of the experience, reality impinging on my inner self, or do we see it as an internally generated experience? I want to also just add 2 comments over here, because I'm aware that these are exceptionally sensitive matters, and matters that may be very, very close to our own personal experiences. And I want to emphasize again, if anything I've said has come across as insensitive or judgmental, or I genuinely apologize. This is not my intention at all. And I want to emphasize that fact. We are all aware that we live in a complicated world, and ever more aware of the challenges of both physical and mental health. And I'm aware that as soon as one speaks about these topics, one is heading perilously close to accidentally causing upset. The second thing I want to mention is to re-emphasize again about moral judgment. The Rambam says in Perek Gimel of Hilchos Teshuvah that only the Kel Deus, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the God who knows Deot, who knows the minds of human beings, can ultimately make moral judgments of any of us. And therefore, as soon as we enter the realm of talking about moral judgments, one again is treading on dangerous territory. So I want again just to be sensitive to that. But in the context of Shaul, I don't mean to say there's no moral judgment possible. I'm just saying that in and of in itself, the experience of a Ruach Ra is not a moral judgment one way or another. And indeed, the very example the Rambam comes from of Kel Deus is found in the context of Shmuel and Shaul's complicated relationship. So, Leonard, you're absolutely right in the comment you posted. Shaul is deemed a tzaddik by any measures, as someone who was an exceptionally great man. But yes, he made mistakes, and Nach is open about that. I'm not comparing his mistakes to our mistakes, but yes, Nach is able to make moral judgments of even great figures. So I hope, I can't remember, who was it who asked me about, Charles, I think you asked me about the Beis Yosef and the Maggid's, the revelation of the Maggid. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Yeah, I think so I can summarize it. It is capable. I think what you're saying although it's only going to be very, very, very few people, but everyone is capable of reaching that level, I think is what you're saying. But clearly only throughout the centuries, only a handful of people will ever reach that spiritual level in order to somehow get to a situation where there is in the atmosphere, there is a spiritual something in the atmosphere, what you compare to radio waves or whatever, and it's just tuning into it, which is very, very rare. So I think what you're saying is not a separate entity. It is actually part of the cosmos, if you like, and it's just a question of reaching it, which so few people can or do.
I would agree with you and disagree with you. I would agree with you it's part of the cosmos, and certainly very few people reach an experience like that of the Beis Yosef. By the way, the same Beis Yosef speaks about the Mishnah as being a personified spiritual force. There was a mystical experience that the Beis Yosef went through with a large group, so we have this attested to as a mass experience on Shavuos night, in which they stayed up learning on Shavuos night, and the soul of the Mishnah appeared to them. And again, it's another example of where a spiritual insight is personified in the language of the mystics as being perceived as an external force. So these sorts of experiences, I agree, are only open to rare individuals and to mystics and to great figures like the rabbis of Cairo. But I would say on a lesser level, all of us need to hear the angels sing. All of us need to live a life where we go through life and we see and hear spirituality, where we hear the spiritual voice of the world, of Torah, of nature, of science. Of course we should go through life. And the Rambam says this is an obligation all of us to achieve Avas Hashem, through building Ava means a relationship, through hearing his communication through Torah, and through hearing his communication through nature and through the world. So on a lesser level, all of us are meant to hear the malachim, the angels. Osa malach of ruchos, all of us are meant to learn to see the world as messengers of Hashem, as spiritual agents. This shouldn't be something that is perceived as lo b'shmaimi. It shouldn't be perceived as something in the heavens that's beyond our achievements as regular human beings. We all need to look. The Hebrew word for an object is a davar, and it's also davar Hashem. It's also a speech, a word. Every davar, every particle in the universe, every object in existence is also meant to say a communication to us. Davar Hashem. So it's meant to be both. I've unfortunately run out of time, so I'm going to stop here. And please God, next week we will start a new topic. As always, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.